Pro football has changed a lot in the last few decades, but what hasn't changed is the role of the players in the trenches, the offensive line. Irv Goode is one of those kind of guys who could play in any era. But at 6'5", 255 pounds, he would have to gain some weight to play these days. 300-pound lineman is the standard. Irv grew up in Kentucky and was a Sporting News high school All-American. He played for the Boone County Rebels, and that high school team now plays its home games on Irv Goode Field. Irv played college ball at Kentucky and was named a first-team All-American. He played both sides of the line of scrimmage, by the way, linebacker on defense and center on offense. He was drafted in both the NFL and the AFL, but picked the NFL and was a first-round draft choice of the football Cardinals. He played 13 years in the NFL, 10 of those here in St. Louis. Goode was the Big Red's Rookie of the Year in 1962. He played in an amazing 162 NFL games, primarily at left guard. He helped anchor a Cardinal offense that included quarterback Jim Hart and halfback Johnny Rowland. Teammates on the offensive line included Jackie Smith, Ernie McMillan, Bob Reynolds, Bob DeMarco, and Ken Gray, one of the best O-lines in NFL history. Irv was a two-time Pro Bowler. He finished his long playing career with a season in Buffalo and 2 years with the Miami Dolphins. He played in Miami's 24-7 Super Bowl win over Minnesota in 1974. He was born in Kentucky, but we claim him as our own. And we're proud to welcome Irv Goode, this great football player, into the St. Louis Sports Hall of Fame.
Thank you.
Well, Irv, not only were you a first-round pick by the Cardinals in 1962, 12th overall, by the way, in the first round, but you're also selected by the Dallas Texans in the American Football League in its third year of existence. The Dallas Texans the next year became the Kansas City Chiefs. But was there ever a doubt when you were drafted that you would sign with the NFL, or was there a decision to be made there when you were drafted by both teams?
Well, you know, money talks.
Big money then, right?
Yeah. And actually at that time, the two leagues hadn't merged yet, so the American Conference, their contract was that they couldn't do anything before our eligibility date to be drafted. So I signed the day before that with the Dallas Texans. And so it was null and void, and so I signed also with the Cardinals. So I was one of those crazy guys. But the contract with Dallas was better than the Cardinal.
And then, of course, the money was huge back then. What, 57 years ago, I read something that said the contract was $15,000 and the signing bonus was a Chevy. Is that true?
That's absolutely true. Yeah.
Was it a nice Chevy?
My contract was $14,000, and I got a new '62 blue Chevy, right, as the bonus. That's correct.
How long did that car last?
I drive pretty hard. It didn't last very long.
So you come to St. Louis, '62, and it's also only the third year that the Cardinals were in St. Louis, having moved from Chicago. And you'd been a center in college, also played a little bit of linebacker at Kentucky, and then some injuries in training camp, and all of a sudden you become a tackle almost immediately. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, it's just I was playing in a Chicago All-Star game at the time, and when they had the injuries, they had a couple injuries at center also, and so they called me and wanted me to come in to camp and leave the All-Star game, and I told them I wouldn't do that because I did say that I was going to play in those games. And so in the meantime, they found another center that actually Bob DeMarco was all-pro and played for many years and did a great job. So when I got there at camp, they had two tackles that got hurt, so they asked me to move to left tackle. So I started 2 years at the left tackle spot, and then we drafted a tackle, and I moved to the guard. Yeah.
And I think sometimes, Irv, what a lot of people forget, there was some up and down seasons there. There wasn't a great amount of success in the 60s, but there were still a lot of great players that came through St. Louis that were your teammates. In the video, it mentioned Jim Hart, Johnny Rowland, of course, on the defensive side of the ball, Roger Worley was there. He came later in your career. Larry Wilson, Jackie Smith on the offense, Ernie McMillan on the offensive line with you. There was a lot of talented players there. What was that experience like playing on a pretty good offensive line and going to 2 Pro Bowls?
Yeah, I think the offensive line was one of the best in the league at the time and I do want to mention Coach Hannafin is sitting here, sitting back at my table also, one of the greatest offensive line coach ever. And the big problem is that I never was coached by him. By the time he got here with the Cardinals and everything, that I was traded to Buffalo at the time. But I think I really missed something by not being coached by him. Good.
I think another thing a lot of people maybe forget about back in the day is before Busch Stadium was built in 1966, which of course became also the home of both Cardinals teams, the football and baseball. But prior to that, you guys also played in Sportsman's Park. And I think probably a lot of people don't remember that. It's always thought of as a baseball stadium, but you guys played there also. What was that experience like, and having the baseball team being so well known, obviously, and the football team essentially being new to town?
Well, I think playing in the old stadium was different. You know, it's still they didn't cover anything up. There was no AstroTurf. There was so we played in a couple real rainy games that was just really something unbelievable. We came in at halftime and just with our full equipment on, went in the shower and showered off to get all the mud off of us. And the stadium was real close to us. The people sitting behind us were really close, so we got to hear some of the things that we didn't want to hear so bad or so much. But it was a different situation, and the new stadium that they built was supposed to be the greatest thing in the world. And what had happened is when it rained or the frost got on the field on the AstroTurf, the arches in the stadium the sunshine would come in those arches a little bit and melt the ice or whatever was on the field, and 10 feet or 5 yards further, then it would be frozen, thawed, and as a guard, you know, I'm pulling, and man, the grip was fabulous. And all of a sudden, about the 4th step, I started sliding and skipping, and then the grip was good, and then it was not. So it was supposed to be, the AstroTurf was supposed to be the greatest thing in the world, but believe me, it wasn't.
And I would say on some of those hot days, that turf wasn't kind on football players' legs, was it?
Well, it's just when I was down in Miami, it was at their tartan turf. They didn't have the AstroTurf; they had tartan turf, and it got up in the 90s, and they took a temperature 6 feet off the rug, and it was 106 degrees.
Ooh, wow! It was mentioned earlier in one of the interviews about the influence of coaches, and one of your first coaches, at least your coach in college. I want to talk about him and then also your last coach in the NFL and what that was like. But I'll start in college with Blanton Collier, who after your career at Kentucky moved on to the NFL and coached 8 seasons and was very successful with the Cleveland Browns. What was great about Blanton Collier, which a lot of people probably don't remember?
Well, Blanton was a technique coach. There wasn't any coaches, if you missed an assignment or if you did something wrong, you didn't have a coach coming up and grabbing your face mask and jerking you around and saying, what the hell's going on? He did it he looked to see what the mistake was, and he would tell you what you had to do to correct the mistake. So I was always a technique guy. Even when I was playing, you know, you have to have your feet wide. You have to keep your feet moving. I don't have to move somebody 3 or 4 yards. All I have to do is move them 3 feet in the back and get through or get by you. So you want to keep the feet wide. You want to keep the head up. You want to keep the arms out in front of you. And it's just technique. And Blanton did that. It's all he talked about. I remember as a center, the first thing that he mentioned when we lined up, he said, "Gentlemen, this is a football. It's a little bit smaller than the high school ball you used. It is 13 pounds. You can see 13 pounds on the ball. It doesn't weigh that much. That's the pressure, air pressure in it, and then snapping the football to the quarterback. It just he wanted the ball to go up to when the quarterback had his hands up under you. They wanted the back end of their hand right on your rear end. And, the ball had to get there, and the laces were on the right side, so he doesn't have to turn it when he's going back to throw a pass. So it was all technique, and that's what I loved about Blanton Collier and that. And he got all of that from the Cleveland Browns when they were winning their championships in 47, 48, 49, and he was a good guy.
And in St. Louis, you had 3 different head coaches: Wally Lem, Charlie Winter, and Bob Holloway. Your last year with the Cardinals, and then after that year in Buffalo, where there was an injury, you move on to Miami, end up going to 1 Super Bowl, and then the playoffs the next year with one of the greatest, if not the greatest, head coaches in the history of the league, Don Shula. What was special, and what was special about Don Shula, and also going to that team? You were there the year after their undefeated season. What was special about that?
Well, I think most of the coaches down there at the time were assistant coaches at the University of Kentucky when I was playing there. Shula was the defensive back coach for Blanton Collier at Kentucky at the time, and so I got used to him a little bit there. But we would have meetings on a Monday or a Tuesday, the first meeting we had, and he would always stand up and say, "Okay, gentlemen, do we have any problems?" He didn't want to go on a practice field if somebody had a problem. And one of the backs, the offensive backs, had some problems with his wife one time, and he was thrown in jail. And so Shula got up and says, "Well, this so-and-so will not be at practice today. But I think he'll be back tomorrow. But I really appreciate somebody letting me know what was going on." So that was all the things that he did. We wore those kind of blazers, those brown blazers all the time, and it was hot in Miami, and we would go to other cities, and people would come up to us and ask us to carry their bags and all that thing, thinking we were the service people. So the captain of the team told Shula, said, "We don't want to wear those anymore. We want to go casual." And the next meeting, he got up and said, "Okay, here we're going to do casual." And so we were playing Oakland that week, and we were out in Oakland at the airport, and I just happened to be standing pretty close to Shula. And Jim Kick was kind of a guy that running back, but loose as a goose. He was kind of just did what he wanted to do mostly. And so he came up, and in the 70s, everybody wore the bell-bottom pants, 2 pockets in the front, no pockets in the back, and he had on a T-shirt, a Muscle Man T-shirt, with a Statue of Liberty giving everybody the finger. Shula almost had a heart attack. So the next meeting, he got up and he said, "Gentlemen, we have a new policy on dress code." We went back to the other
way. I have to ask you before we wrap this up. Played a long time ago in the NFL. The game obviously has changed in a lot of ways. And when you watch the game now, and especially even if you highlight on offensive line play, and when the head slap was legal, and all the things that defensive players could do, which have basically been taken out of the game, what is your reaction as you watch the game today, comparing it to when you played?
Well, they had to do a lot of things. This heads up that they're teaching in Little League ball and high school and all that kind of stuff is a good thing. There's not much they can do about the brain stuff because it's going to ricochet in any helmet you wear. But you talk about the slap or the head slap. I was playing against Roger Brown in Detroit Lions, and he came up, and instead of a head slap, he just slugged me. And it took my face mask and put it flat against my face like this, where I couldn't even hardly talk. So I had to go out of the game. They unscrewed it, put a new one on. It came back out again. I said, "Hey, AW, what are you doing? You're not supposed to be slugging people." And he said, "Quit bitching. That was my left hand." It was a long day.
I guess that says it all. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Irv Goode to the St. Louis Sports Hall of Fame. Congratulations, Irv.